Hi all, welcome to the first of this semester's lecture series here at the Oslo Association of Architects. We are continuing exploring the theme, nye former, or new forms, and are very pleased to have Alessandra Covini from Studio Ossidiana presenting their work this evening. Studio Ossidiana is an architecture, design, and research practice based in the Netherlands, founded in 2015 by Alessandra Covini and Giovanni Bellotti. It goes without saying that the studio represents new forms in numerous ways, through shapes, storytelling, not to mention their inclusiveness of other species in their work. Their work blur the boundary between architecture, design, art, landscape, and urban strategies, recognized by playfulness, tactility, and inclusivity. Their latest work, Utomhusverket, currently on display in front of Arkites in Stockholm and Tower of Pigeons at the 2021 Architecture Biennale in Venice, illustrate this quest for more inclusive ways of defining the relation between humans, animals, and nature in our environment. It is impressive how their practice manifests into their built works, a call for action, and questions our role as designers in defining new relationships with our environment. So on that note, I give the screen to you, Alessandra.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the kind introduction and the invitation. I will now share the screen. Can you see it? One second. Gio, bisogna un secondo di un aiuto qui perché non so come togliere questo coso. One second. Quick coso. Do you also see myself? And you?
Yeah.
We see.
Okay, so I have to try to take this out. Fammi tu. Okay. Do you see it?
No, now we just see you.
Okay. So, if I share screen.
And now we see your desktop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now. Great. Sorry for this. Okay, so today I would like to first introduce a few themes that are relevant for us, and then I like present a few projects at different scales. And in our studio, we work across different scales, to objects, installations, architectural and research projects. And what we try to do in our project is to imagine and create alternative worlds, and that could propose. And what we try to do in our project is to imagine and create alternative worlds, and we see our work as a collection of fragments that are made to convey visions for the future that could propose forms of relation and encounter rituals and activities. And we are interested in designing spaces that ask for action and transformation, and which are an invitation to play, but also to abstract and cultivate, and spaces that tell stories and set narratives, and they talk about relations between humans, but also between people and other animals. And we try to do this, working across different scales through architecture, objects, and materials. And actually, we're quite passionate about the translation of materials into architecture. And this is always a point of departure for us in our projects, rather than a layer added at the end of the process. And in our projects, we've been exploring different techniques and materials mainly related with casting. And like materials are for us like a way to embed narratives and identity in spaces, and objects are ways to tell stories or emphasize the bond with a territory. And like, for example, now we're working on new materials which are based on horticultural composites, like expanded clay, earth, hemp, which are in a way cast soils that could be gardened and with time become soil again. Or, for example, what we call surf and turf material that is made by industrial soils and materials from the sea, like combining expanded clay and charcoal with shells into new terrazzo surfaces. And today we would like to present like a selection of like 6 or 7 projects, which apart from the first one, they are all very recent. So they have been completed for a series of circumstances within the last 4 months. And like the first project we would like to share is Amsterdam Allegories, which is like a project with which we won the Dutch Prix de Rome for architecture, which in the Netherlands is the oldest prize for architects and artists under the age of 35. And we would like to start with this project because it's a sort of manifesto for us. So both in terms of method and themes, and in a way it was also the starting point of many other projects. So Amsterdam Allegories is a proposal for a new type of public realm in Sixhaven in Amsterdam, which is located in Amsterdam North, so just outside the Central Station, over the large Canal I. And like the Amsterdam that we all know, like so the Amsterdam of the canals, historically has always faced south, and now it's developing north, so over the I. And the Sixhaven, which is the triangle in the map, will be at the very center of the future city on the I. And after studying the new development plan for Amsterdam North, we realized that the vocabulary for its future public spaces seems made mainly by bold icons, polished boulevard and waterfronts, fancy harbor with historical ships. And we find that often public spaces have a timid design which follow a vocabulary that is similar in like many other places in the world. And so like the project wanted to offer an alternative to this by transforming Sixhaven into a new spatial type, a walled harbor inhabited by 21 floating islands. And like so we wanted the project to be a call for a new surreal and experimental public domains, rich in sensorial experiences and discoveries, where the islands are places that they want to make us wonder and surprise us, and at times could even frighten us. So we also imagine the islands as built allegories. So each refers to narratives, forms, types, and natures found in the city and its expanded territory. So it's port, the lake, the polders, the fields. And the islands are also accessible only by boat. So we see water as a democratic surface, an unknown territory for everybody, where there are no beaten paths. And also we think that water enhances encounter. On water, we are closer to fellow humans, a bit like when we walk in the mountain trail. And like in this context, we say hi, because it's both a pleasure and precaution, because we make our presence known. So it's an environment in which we are foreigners and guests. And the islands, more than being defined by a program, are different words that offer many different possibilities of uses and misuses. And as we began to design and think and build models of this island in our offices, like each island became a project in itself. So in a way, the project was also a process of composition of stories, of architectures and ideas of nature that, as we proceeded, began to communicate between each other and to suggest new encounters. So I will now go through like a few of these islands, and this is the shore island, which in a way is a tribute to the Dutch coast. It's a thought on the relation between the city and the territory, and it's also on the relation between leisure and fear. So it reflects both on coastal erosion, on sea level rise, but it also wants to convey a certain optimism. It's also a vast sand pit, it's a sand garden. And it's also like another island is a house for collective barbecues. That is a place where to rest in a warm room during winter, or dry up after a summer storm, or after a swim in the waters of the eye. A black mountain, like a floating embassy with the cold peaks of the port downstreams, a site for barbecues and adventurous campfires. A palace dedicated to water, sort of dedicated to swimming in the eye, that is like a floating memory of the Belt bathhouse that used to be an open air pool that was very close to to 6-7, and which we reimagined as a place to swim alongside fishes and plants, a floating Turkish bath, a garden for agricultural, spontaneous, or ornamental plants, in their cultural and botanical intersection, inspired by the Lusthoven as much as the miniatured landscapes in the port. A floating aviary to reflect and rethink the cultural categories we use to approach other animals, so the invasive, the native, the feral. So an aviary at the intersection between zoology and politics. And like through those, like we imagine 6-7 as a place of smells. So the smell of earth and fermenting cereals that mix with the fumes of the barbecues, while wading birds fish along humans, and other animals share the shore with locals and tourists. Or mountains of dark soil create a skyline along with a mass of sailing boats and the skyscraping perches for migratory birds. And also we thought of the islands as places where at the very least different social groups can cross paths, share space, but also as places where Amsterdam citizens meet other species, a place to cultivate a more nuanced relation with nature, a place that offers possibilities of encounters between humans and other animals, plants, and minerals, where the citizens of Amsterdam would be the embassies of the territory they inhabit, so the fluxes of water, the migratory birds, the heaps of materials on the shore, but where one could also meet lost or forgotten elements of the city architecture. And besides being harbored in 6-7, the islands would move around the city, creating new unexpected, estranging, or familiar encounters with these other figures of the landscape, and propose new forms of sublime on waters across Amsterdam territory. So, like with Amsterdam allegories, we wanted to celebrate the messiness of the shore over the sanitized slickness of the waterfront, the unpredictability of the encounter over the vanity of the architectural statement, or the supposed boldness of the architectural icon. And we also wanted to imagine a space where the citizen would no longer be seen as a user or consumers, but rather as a sailor, as a gardener, as a farmer, as a collector, a cartographer, or as an explorer. And Amsterdam Allegories was a project that was very important for us, both in terms of process and themes and method and way of representations. So it was also the base for many other projects that we are still doing now, from the research approach, the interest in typology, but also the process of working with the models as operative objects. And another project I would like to show is called the Fire Dunes, and it's a project that we built in April, and we would like to share it because it's one of the first projects we worked on after Amsterdam Allegories, and it was initially designed for Almere, and Flevoland among the Dutch cities and regions is in a way the flattest, and it's for the most part below sea level, and here we are commissioned to design a public space on a beach a couple of years ago. And Flevoland emerged through the biggest reclamation project worldwide. So it used to be the Zuiderzee, the inner sea of the Netherlands. And in this horizontal landscape, we started looking for mountains. So from the dunes that protect the country from the sea, to the sand transported on the barges, to the heaps of sand around construction sites. So a landscape we are seeing emerging in many places. And we started to recognize it as almost as a sort of genre of landscape. And in the meantime, the world changed. Almere doesn't have a budget anymore, but our photographic collection of heaps keeps growing. And 1 year after, an association from Utrecht invited us to think of an installation in their space. And their place was a vast inhabited site where we started finding other landscapes of dunes, heaps of sand, earth, and bricks, and we remained quite fascinated. And our impression in the Netherlands is one of a country where the only thing left is to pass the vacuum cleaner. And here somehow we find a contemporary wilderness, a temporary wilderness. And and we think that between the artificial dunes of Almere and the temporary dunes of Utrecht, there is not a big difference. They're all dredged from the sea, and the project of a territory is the same. So it's a country whose energy is fully oriented towards endlessly rebuilding itself. So we think that this context was really ideal for our fire dunes. And we started collecting images of fires, stoves, chimneys, campfires. So we started looking at the collective rituals of open air fires, domestic chimneys, and that are time just rooms dedicated to fire, big enough to be inhabited. And we were fascinated by like also the Russian stove, like which is this kind of warm macro object that can be bed, oven, kitchen between architecture, furniture, and a model of a building. So like our project became a series of variations on a fireplace, so a portal, a kitchen, a scenographic wall, and a crater on the top with different orientation to protect from the wind, which becomes a dune as it's covered in sand. And the dune itself is heated by each fireplace. So in a way, it's a sort of geological Russian stove made of sand that heats the room and the sand itself as the fires are lit, and offer places to cook between the dunes. The sort of scenography lit by the fire. And so we did a series of variations on the project, from one large fire dune to landscape dunes. And we really love to work with this type of models, where the material, in the case of sand and steel, is both one-to-one and the representation. So yeah, like immediately this type of model immediately becomes small worlds to explore, they become operative. So we tried the different configurations, and so we also took photos of the model by night. And like these photos are taken in our studio balcony by night. And this is the main fire room, the portal. And this is actually the project when we lit the fires for the first time, like a few months ago. And we tried out the barbecue, and yeah, it was also, we cooked for the first time by night in the darkness. It looked almost like a cave. And we tested also some pizzas that were Dutch chef. The pizza was not really amazing, but they didn't give the fault to the ovens. And so like with this project, we tried to create a public space that could bring together the domestic. So with the project, we tried to create a public space that could bring together the domestic intimate scale, like of the domestic kitchen, and the collective one of the campfire. And like in the meantime, like the surrounding changed again, and surrounded by buildings that observed the dunes as it was a sort of strange guest in the garden, a memory of the past keeps. And these are some photos of the process of installation. And the photos are quite important for us because they show that architecture is not something fixed, but as something moving that changes shape. And so again, like also during the construction site, it was like for us, like working on a model one-to-one. So it was in a way the same process and materials of our model. So in a way, it was a sort of large model with larger equipment and machines. And the form of the dunes could be endlessly excavated, allowing for different landscapes to emerge. So this one is a crater that transformed the dune in a volcano. And we went like a few times to see it, and it was never the same. So like, one evening, we even found a camper parked in front of it with a couple warming up in front of the fire, and that prepared the fire before going to bed for the next morning. Or we were there was a guy that was doing jumps from the volcano. So it became this kind of large landscape to explore and climb. It was a project made by sand, but also actually made by footprints and traces of fire and the smell of food cooking, sand and log burning. As the project is really a silhouette at night, and for the most part, it is sand, matter, which becomes material through its use, and it makes no sense without actions. And like another project I would like to show, which is like actually a research project made by different projects that we've been working on in the past 3 years, is variations on a bird cage. And so this project focused on some of the objects that we use to mediate our encounter with other species. And it began as Giovanni's postgrad thesis in urbanism at MIT 3 years ago. And then it continued through a commission for the Turkish artist Kutlu Gataman, for whom we designed 3 shelters for geese in Erzincan. And then it expanded, being an exhibition at an institute or like at Van Eyck Academy in Maastricht. And then it's also the research project to be presented at the Venice Architecture Biennale. in this spring. And so it is also a theme that is close to us personally. Like we have a parrot, an Amazon oratrix called Coco. And lately, especially during the quarantine, we've been designing tools and objects to engage, play, and learn with him. So it's a project that has been for us with us for a while now, and that took different forms and titles, and has known many scales. So from the urban territorial scale to the scale of furniture making, architectural project, and material research. But the starting point is the cage. So like the object, which is also an archetype, and it's to close relatives, perches, feeders, aviaries. And like the first definition of the cage is that one of a tool designed to allow human and non-human existence. But increasingly, we began to see the cage not just as a place where we contain or frame nature, not just as the enclosure, but as an important political object, something both physical and tangible, but always the model of something else, something bigger, a model of our ideas of nature. And the reason why we're particularly interested in birds and the objects between birds and people, is because there are a series of reasons. And like birds carry metaphors in every culture, perhaps more than any other species. So metaphorically connecting ground and sky, like heaven and earth. But birds are also very literally the greatest force behind the globalization of nature. So along with humans, as they disperse seeds and through adaptation and migration exist in every corner of the planet. So they're always around us, always very close, even within us. So in the sense, somehow the imitation of birds precedes and probably leads to every form of music and language. So in this frame, we started to think of the cage not just as a place of the animal in the house, but potentially as a mediative object. So the language of an exchange through which the bird in a way becomes human, and through which perhaps the human becomes a bird in return. So looking through the cage also means being looked at. Knowing the behavior of another animal also means making our behavior known. And also it defines birds as pets, exotic, endangered, or the ones that are out of it as wild, feral, invasive. But it also defines people as a species that invents objects to mediate their encounter with other forms of life. So we started working on some cages ourselves, again, by making a series of models. Some were interpreting existing typologies, other as a physical sketches of our own proposals, and by working on the larger usable prototypes. So like the idea behind this exercise is to challenge the cage to be a man-made intermediary between humans and birds. And like all these models that we made range from bat towers that are designed with an early idea of ecosystem services between the US and Italy in the 30s to fight malaria. We worked on a range of the dovecote tower, which are like the first birds to be, pigeons are the first birds to be domesticated, or the roccoli, which are gardens that used to trap birds in Italy. We worked on foldable and openable cages and aviaries inspired by Cedric Price, Snowdon Aviary in London, or bird perches for migratory birds to rest on, and a domestic perches for parrots, or paraphernalia for falconry. So, I mean, basically, this could be a lecture on its own. So today I will keep it short and show some of the prototypes. So, one of the first prototype actually started in the US, studying the quack furniture, the quintessential North American furniture, while doing landscape and urbanism researches on aviaries, and then continued during the quarantine when we found ourselves working from our studio in Rotterdam without the team, with the only company of our parrot Coco, this our 2-year-old Amazon oratrix from Rijswijk. And we had a lot of time to spend with him, and enjoyed flying freely in our studio during work hours, perching on our chairs and playing with our project models. I mean, probably picturing himself as a feathered dinosaur attacking miniature building while we were distracted. And so we designed a bench for him and for us, a variation on the Windsor bench, which was designed to accommodate us together, perching and sitting on it. We designed a chair with an elongated backrest for Coco to sit while we work or eat. And we really love this furniture style because of the variation it allows. So we started developing a few more. And Coco, in the meantime, is here next to me and say hi. And this one is a sort of throne for a person and a bird. And yeah, our bird keeps flying towards it. So it really enjoys it as a vantage point. We also made a side table where to empty your pocket at the end of the day, or leave a book by the bed, providing new exciting objects to be discovered by Coco, Beaks and Claws. And then we also worked on a prototype for a platform, which we see as a sort of petrified carpet abstracting a garden. And so the first platform bench, we made a few. And this one was the first one, which is a sort of a man-made rock, which we thought was of as a garden carpet, where nature is abstracted. So the lake becomes a water bowl, the mountain a block of clay, the forest a series of perches. And we made it as a surface to be used outdoors and shared with a domestic bird, where to play or eat on, as well as a map to be occupied, abandoned and transformed, which is made by a variety of composite materials bound by lime or by compression. And when we were in Maastricht, we installed it on the ground floor of the Jambanek Academy, facing a beautiful garden. And actually, Dax quickly built the courage to venture inside, joining for aperitivo at the opening. And then we further developed this for the Venice Architecture Biennale. And here at the Biennale, we presented this platform merging different scales. So from the models to the towers to the domestic perches, they were actually used by Coco in our studio. And it's a modular cast landscape that is rich in affordances and possibilities of action. So it's a place to eat, play, touch, and negotiate the boundaries between our species and others. And the collection of scale models proposes and reflects on different scales of engagement and action. It's a sort of becomes also a miniature city for birds at different scales. We made a series of chess pieces that become both one-to-one in a way model. There are a series of edible insertions as seeds, shells, squid bones, water collection bowls. Yeah, so beside the platform, we also worked on a series of pigeon towers. And somehow we had a sort of pigeon phase because we found we found pigeons an exceptional family of birds, because they range from the rock dove to prized racing birds with a spectrum of relations to people, ranging from agriculture to communication to leisure and farming. And of course, it has also they have been symbolically freed by revolutionaries and popes for centuries. And before Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch developed a system to artificially fix nitrogen, pigeons were actually widely kept, not just for their meat, but for their guano, because it was the main source for fertilizers and explosives. So it's an animal that is completely designed by people, tied to wars, politics, economy, and today somehow is unnecessary and is kept for racing or display, but mainly regarded as a sort of urban now as a pest. And so basically we started making a series of dovecotes ourselves. And these one are dovecote towers that are composed of modules. And here are assembled in 3 segments, and one is made of hemp and lime, one in rammed earth, one with a porous mix of expanded clay. And again, we exhibited those also in Maastricht. And in a way, each floor is a pigeon loft, and they compose a sort of pigeon totem. And again, also here, ducks knew no boundaries, and they didn't seem to care that they were picking into pigeon lofts. And then, yeah, we also made still part of our obsession on pigeons and dovecotes. We also presented at the Biennale a pigeon tower, which is in the Giardini delle Vergini. And it's this time is a metallic feather dovecote that in a way echoes the city's bell tower, that is offering shelter to pigeon, magpies, ravens, and other urban birds. And somehow it has a certain significance in Venice, where there are so many pigeons, and is a sort of Trojan horse for the birds. And they take the color of the context, green or blue. And in a way, the pigeon tower is dressed like a bird with a beak, a sort of big gutter and a bird feet that is overseeing the flock of Venetian pigeons. And now it was also mentioned in the introduction, and I would like to share the project that we realized for ArcDes, the National Center for Architecture and Design in Stockholm. And like we were asked to design a public space for the summer program. And we envisioned the project as a mineral garden, as a map of intersecting frames, designing as a place for the encounter between different groups of people and different species. So for the encounter between humans and birds, but also with plants, minerals, and artificial rocks. It is also, in a way, designed like an astronomical clock pointing north. And for the project, we also used different loose materials for its ground, so different types of shells, gravel, loam, or sand. And these different types of grounds can also be, will be mixed, are being mixed, becoming in a way new soils. So the project in itself is a sort of tribute to the ground. And we imagine the project also as a civic stage for urban horticultural rituals, so mixing soils, digging, getting your feet wet, picking a flower or some berries. But it's also a place where to play games, give speeches or lectures, but also gather, sleep, or sunbathe on the sundial. And the forms of the different elements allows for different affordances and possibilities of action. So every action around the platform becomes a performance. So it's a place where to observe and be observed. And it is also made by different elements. So there is a way the frame all around, which is between hedges of gardens and a petrified chaise longue to sit, lay on, run on top, or there is a sundial that is pointing north, which is both a slope facing south, and an object that is marking the passing of time and the hours of the day standing in front of it. The bird garden, which is at the embassy of the Swedish Forest Gardens, with mosses, different types of berries, ivy, juneberry trees, only accessible to birds, with openings for humans to pick through. And the garden is also inhabited by a series of man-made rocks as a platform for games, plants, and seeds, which is a fragment of the Venice Biennale platform that we are now testing in public space, where to play chess and backgammon and other games. We also did a bird puzzle, an homage to Enzo Mari's animal puzzle with different bird species. There is a pond, which is a mirror of water, and the black gravel that we use for the bottom of the pond makes it become like a dark mirror reflecting the sky and the surrounding. And it's also filled with water plants, and basically the pond and the project has been immediately discovered by the federal inhabitants of the island as a buffet. So basically the whole project in fact can be seen as an inhabited dish. So it's seashells are in fact part of the bird's diet. They supply calcium, and the water plants turned out to be a delicacy for the ducks. And so it became a sort of spa where to lay in the sun or bath in the water. So alongside family of birds, also young humans started discovering its affordances while the birds observe. And also here we tested the tall perches at this time at an urban scale, which started intersecting the routes of migratory birds. And that they cast shadows on the ground, becoming a projected language. And many birds, especially the ones who are prey and not predators, can actually read the shadows. And there are all these perches and bird ladders, bird feeders that at some point were confessed by a family of seagulls that started using them as vantage points, which left us a little bit worried about the families of ducks and geese beneath. But also gave us, as designers and to the curators of ArcDes, the responsibility of being gardeners and literally curating, taking care of the work and of its human and non-human population. Another project that I'd like to share is the Bird Palace, which is a project we just recently completed, even though we were, it was supposed to be realized last year. And it's a floating garden in Vondelpark, which is Amsterdam's most renowned park. And in a way, the project could be seen as a built fragment of Amsterdam allegories and variations on a bird cage. So for the project, we started looking at the repertoire of forms and types of the city territory. So from pleasure gardens edges to the cranes of the court, to the genre of painting of women with birds, which are also exhibited at the Rijksmuseum, 10 minutes walk from Vondelpark. And so the project is located in a very quiet pond on the south entrance of the park. And Vondelpark is a city monument. and is inhabited by different species of birds, so Alexandrine parakeets, Egyptian geese, Eurasian coots, Indian crows, gray herons. And the project was imagined as this floating garden, like anchored in the Vondelpark pond, and we imagined it as a space for encounter between birds, like native and non-native, feral and wild, and the people of Amsterdam. So both residents and commuters, students and tourists. And the project was imagined to be discovered by means of bird watching, so between the canopies of trees of bushes, or to be observed from the shore with the support of binoculars or cameras. And it was imagined as a contemporary public Lusthof where to observe and be observed, feed and collect. And it's inhabited by a series of tall perches and bird feeders. And like we imagine them between the masts of sailing boats or antennas, and in a way other subtracted birds with beaks to nests and bellies full of seeds. And they're inhabited also by 3 silos with full of seeds. And as the garden was installed, like the first courageous duck went in exploration, eventually deciding to venture inside and discover this large buffet contained in the island. And slowly the island was also discovered by other water birds. Egyptian geese found their spot drying their feathers after a swim. And the perches and bird feeders emerged from a heap of fertile soil. So the birds, as they feed, play, and deposit guano on their heap, they also disperse seeds, so fertilizing the ground, in a way becoming the gardeners of the floating island. So over the period of 6 weeks, the heap will become a temporary flower field, initially supporting the park's seed eaters, and then setting the ground for the arrival of bees and butterflies, eventually calling for other insectivorous birds. And here is the garden that pivots on the water, marking the passing of time. So another project I would like to share is called Buyukada Songlines. And it's a project we developed for the Istanbul Design Biennial, following an invitation by the curator, Mariana Pestana. And it's a floating garden, and we designed it to cruise the water of Marmara and of the Bosphorus, connecting Istanbul Prince Islands with the city Asian and European shores. And before we get there, we would like to share a bit what is behind the project. So the images in these slides are all from Ottoman era and are miniatures, and show a selection of floating pavilions which in different times inhabited the waters of Istanbul. So for us, it's a project that works within a certain tradition of architecture, which is certainly not exclusive to a culture or a place. So we began to think of it as a tradition which binds many water cities. So we all know the Teatro del Mondo, where Aldo Rossi combined the early Renaissance Florentine kiosks and theaters, Elizabethan theaters, lighthouse architecture, and also like a certain structure of the 18th century in Venice that were floating structures built for the carnival, or other contemporary projects. Robin Smithson's proposal for a floating island realized only after its death, floating around Manhattan. So a tradition which belongs more to water than to a specific culture or place. And I guess that some of you is familiar with the unique geography of Istanbul. So it's a city of 20 million inhabitants, like between Asia and Europe. It's a convergence of water. And historically was looked at 3 cities, like so Galata Pera, the Golden Horn, Scutari. And then there are the Prince Islands, which are 9 islands, 5 miles off the Asian coast. And like the islands have been of exile and retreat inhabited for millennia with a unique microclimate and ecology. And there were also places of exile for Oman royalty, the place where Trotsky fled after leaving Soviet Russia before finding its end in Mexico. He lived in Buyukada, which is the largest of the 9 islands between 1929 and 1933. So, and still today is still a place where writers, intellectuals, but also fishermen and many tourists and residents go. And then like the island's multicultural nature encompasses both its human non-human inhabitants. And then in the islands, we began to imagine Buyukada songlines, so echoing Chatwin diaries of the Aboriginal songlines, so other definitions of territories emerged not as lines on a map, but through the knowledge of stories, music, plants, and minerals. So this is the route that we followed, a bit erratic, as the barge moved through the archipelago, coming from the Asian shore, heading towards the European coast of Marmara before returning to the island. And so this was our garden, and was docked on the commercial port of Buyukada, like waiting to sail off. And so Buyukada Songlines, it's really like a design project and a journey, and is a created travel across the island's stories and ecologies. And the host is a floating installation, a surreal garden built on a barge and designed to accommodate plants, soils, insects, birds, and people, towed between the islands in the waters of Marmara and the Bosphorus. And so like a floating embassy, the floating garden collected plants, artifacts, matters, and stories from the 9 islands. So like a conversation, recordings, and materials built its physical and material collection, which is both created through events and literally cultivated. So, and the project, the garden is inhabited by some installation, an earthy platform that is representative of the soil of the islands, a marine terrazzo medallion that is made with shells and rocks gathered in Buyukada, and a central medallion, which is a sort of, in a way, it's within the tradition of these water fountains in gardens, also represented in carpets. And at the completion of the journey, like together with the plants of the garden, the triptych of sculptural elements was donated to the archipelago and permanently installed in Buyukada. And the garden wants also to be a place at the threshold of politics, design, and ecology, where conversation can be held upon the very waters they seek to describe and transform, where topics can be abstracted and generalized, but also grounded type of place, flickering between the context of the waters, soils, and animals, and their human abstraction and metaphors. And also the garden traveled and hosted along its route dancers and academics, yoga session and conversation, fishermen and insects, dancers and feral cats, becoming a public and nomadic pavilion populated by inhabitants, and like by the stories of the city's terrestrial and maritime territories. And we also documented the last stretch of the journey. And so the barge arrived to Buyukada and then was greeted by a rather surprised captain before traveling across Marmara, heading to the European shores. And like beyond the historical echoes, as we mentioned with Amsterdam allegories, we saw water as really like a public domain and as a space for the encounter. And water empathy is highlighted. Water is a place of leisure and of fear, foreign to all, where rules are determined by plants as much as they are by weather. And upon the surface, distinction between locals and tourists, natives and foreign fade, as everyone becomes a traveler. And as we traveled, this garden room became the observer of the city, like a guest of its water, host to some of its inhabitants. And as it moved across, like around the coast of Buyukada, towards the uninhabited island of Neandros, which is actually inhabited by a colony of cormorants. And then we like sailed towards the coast of Helibeliada. We saw from distance Sivriada, where in the 1911 there was a stage for a dog massacre, where actually the dogs that were of the streets of Istanbul have been exiled, dying of hunger and thirst as they tried to escape. Or Yasiada, where politicians and academics following the 1960 coup were trialed and sentenced, was also used by Byzantines for sending prominent figures into exile. And as it traveled, it hosted human travelers, so like ourselves, along with our guests, as we recorded interviews and conversations, some non-human passengers, so gulls and crows taking a lift, but also butterflies, bees, and ants, which traveled from island to island. And eventually we arrived in Fatih, which is the tip of Istanbul, and we see in sight, and we started recognizing the minarets of the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia and Topkapi Palace in distance. And here we were about to pass beneath the Galata Bridge. Yeah, and this one was just before docking in a leach in the Golden Horn, and where the barge actually stayed. And yeah, this before leaving actually for one last time for the islands. And yeah, and at the end we delivered the plants and all these man-made rocks of Uyukada, where they actually been installed permanently. And then maybe I have time for the last project. And it's called the Three Floating Rooms, and it's a competition that we won last year. And actually the construction started this week. And it's an art pavilion and a small museum for land art and multimedia in Almere in the Netherlands. And it will open next March for Floriade, which is the largest horticultural expo in the world, and takes place every 10 years in the Netherlands. And I mentioned something about Flevoland, about the region before, but for us, especially for this project, was extremely important to understand the context that we were working in. So Almere is a city in the Netherlands that was built in the 80s, so it's a new town in Flevoland. And the Flevoland is the 12th and the latest province of the country. So it's the result of the largest land reclamation project worldwide. So it was a territory. It is a territory that was open sea, so was also the main entrance in the Golden Age until the 19th century to Amsterdam port. And Flevoland has been transformed over the 20th century into new land through one of the largest engineering efforts of the past centuries. So islands became inland, sailors became farmers, the bottom of the sea became land, so it became a certain point a vast mud land to explore. So we were really fascinated by the story of Flevoland and by how Floriade is also part of its story and of its making. And so during the process, we also discovered the figures of the landscape of Flevoland that tell the story of an endless negotiation with land and water. So all these islands that belong to the sea becoming mainland, new islands enclosing lakes of dredged seeds containing new forms of nature. And we also looked at all these figures that inhabited the landscape, began to think of projects of land art of Flevoland as new shores. So also, Flevoland also in Floriade spoke about cultivation, both at the intimate scale of gardening and the territorial scale of farming. And in this landscape, all these kind of variations of language of lightweight glass palaces and greenhouses emerge. And with this new nature, there are also new inhabitants of these places, and not only humans, but also minerals and animals which have arrived, which somehow will come back also in our material research. So basically, after all these considerations, we began to think of the museum as a sequence of characters, each working as a frame. So the first one is the port, a circle frame in waters, so at least to be curated and cultivated, where plants can be gardened and action performed. And the second is a platform, which is the terrace of the museum that flows with within the ring. And then when it's docked, it becomes the outdoor terrace of the museum. And so it's a sort of float. I mean, it initially was imagined as this floating island. And then there is the museum pavilion, which is the third circle on water, docked tangentially to the ring. And the pavilion is a lightweight cylindrical structure that encloses exhibition rooms, like a sort of greenhouse. So these are the three different characters that makes the museum. And we wanted to propose a new type of museum that could offer different possibilities for creating exhibition and for cultivating water. So a system of indoor and outdoor frames. So we thought of the Museum of Land Art and Multimedia in Flevoland as something that could give the possibility to display, interact, and perform on water. So to work as a port for art, but also literally as a port, as boats or other floating installations may dock its outer perimeter or inhabit the pond. So we started imagining all these different curatorial possibilities, and we imagined this water courtyard almost as Bagno Vignoni in Italy, where water plants will be collected and farmed, or there could be floating treatment wetlands. And we think of it as a port, so boats could moor. There could be host exhibition spaces, so barge with gardens or heaps of soils, or maybe a houseboat for artist residency. So this is the position where the pavilion will be located in the main square and the Grand Canal of Floriade, and the observatory. So it's very simple. It has a very simple design. So there is a core with service in it and circulation on the side. And for this project, we developed also material research, which I mentioned in the beginning. So we imagined this like what we call the surf and turf, which uses mussels and shells and expanded clay, sand, charcoal, and earth. Basically they compose this kind of new materials. So they petrify the materials from the region into this kind of new mineral floor. And so like this one are some of the shells that we made the samples of, and now we are in the process of scaling up and looking for the final samples. And so this one are like some of the images of the latest development of the project. So this one is, our representation started changing as soon as we started presenting not only to the jury, but also to developers, municipalities, and different parties. And by night, figures of the facade emerged from the building, creating this new civic facade. And the walls are in semi-transparent polycarbonate wrapped by a curtain that will, with cutouts that will shape and filter the light actually in different ways. There are a series of openings towards the water. And so we envision like the pond as a contemporary public Lusthof inhabited by art, people, and other species within calmer waters, where we could arrive by boat. So like from the canal, where we could observe the sculptures inside the port, or where you could bath like within a sculpture garden, or in very cold winters, like when if the water freezes, could become a skating ring. Could be like a place to do bird watching. Could be circumnavigated like a very large buoy, and like at night it glows like a lantern, revealing a glimpse of the digital art. Thank you. This is it.
Thank you. Wow. All of the work is so beautiful, but it's just so intriguing to get the richness of each project. They all have such a clear identity, but still it's such a coherency within the project as a whole. So it's very impressive. Thank you for a very.
Thank you.
Maybe let's just again say if anyone watching has any questions, write it in the chat. I'm sure some of us has some.
I would like to ask a question to Alessandra. Thank you again for the really inspiring lectures. As Aspen says, it's a really beautiful and evocative projects. I was just wondering, it seems like you use ornaments and symbols in your projects as a tool to make the users engage with their environment. And if that's so, then maybe you can tell us a bit more about that approach. I'm especially thinking of your project in Sweden, the Utomhusverket, for example, but also you see it as a sort of line through.
No, thank you for your question. Yeah, there are certain forms that somehow come back in our projects. Like in a way, we really love this abstract geometrical forms that could talk and relate to many different contexts. Like I think that many times they start from often we start projects like a little bit like, as I showed for Flevoland, or as I showed for Amsterdam allegories, or for Pigeon like all this research on typology. I mean, we often start looking at existing typologies, or what we call forms of the territory, that start inspiring us. And that one becomes a sort of starting point also in our formal vocabulary. And then of course it gets transformed and mediated through our, by our imagination. And so somehow, usually it comes from there. And then I guess it also became part of our language. So for example, all these edges that we have, like for example, in Utomhusverket, or now today I didn't show it, but in the playground, or this kind of, or the edge of the barge in Istanbul. In a way, I mean, we did at a certain point all our research on Baroque hedges of gardens or walls of gardens that all have this kind of motifs, and somehow they get, they got transformed and reimagined in different materials somehow. So I think that, for example, comes from there. So yeah, I hope this
yes,
answers in terms of approach. Yes.
It's very interesting. Also, these recognizable symbols that really attract varied, different people also to engage in your work.
Yeah.
I have a kind of follow-up question to that, because I was also thinking, when you talk about your projects, it also seems like you're kind of working with scenographies, or you would talk about it in that way. And I was also thinking, if you could say something more about what role the kind of actors play in the scenography, even if birds, humans, how you talk or think about this in your process, in your work.
I think it's a very super good question. I think the actors are like always super important. It's because we really love to. I mean, sometimes we feel that the projects are complete when we see like the human or non-human interaction with them. So, for example, I had at the beginning of the presentation an image of the playground, and which are this kind of green walls, and that project, it was like quite unbelievable when it started being inhabited by children, or the fire dune, like when we started seeing. I mean, it was quite amazing when we every time we were going there, literally there was something completely different happening. So there were maybe children trying to conquest the hip of the dune, or like a family like cooking their meal in front of it. So or the birds. I mean, like many times, like our this kind of furniture that we showed, like there is it becomes something way more powerful when suddenly we see the bird interacting with it, because it's not anymore a sort of sculptural static installation, but it really becomes something I don't know, like it trigger all these kind of actions that for us are really very important in the project. So like the actors, it's like super important for us, and we're also very curious to see how all the projects will be appropriated and used. So in a way, I feel that many times we see projects as tools, so we also see what will happen. So the perches in Vondelpark, like we are studying like how the birds are interacting with those objects and so on. But we feel that the projects are complete when are inhabited somehow. And in terms of process, like we try to think at like what are all the possible affordances and possibilities of action that a project or a certain form could allow. So I think that is something that we always think beforehand, and then often we are surprised by different other ways that the project was appropriated.
Nice, thank you.
Do we have any more in the chat? It's so fun to see these, to get these explanations on the design, how the animals and the usage of the people inform the design. Do you have a favorite species to draw for?
I think it's really great to have as a client someone that can fly. So we're very happy to keep continuing our research on birds. I mean, what we would love to do a bit more. I mean, we love to keep exploring with our parrot how he uses and inhabits the world that we create for him. So like as I mean, we would love. I mean, we see all the different projects as in a way as tools. So I think the next step, something we'd really love to do, like we would like to keep documenting, or for example, the Dovecote Tower that now is installed in Venice. We would be super happy to test it actually with pigeon fanciers and so on, and see and discover and change the project also based on what our discoveries are.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that answer. I'm very curious to follow.
Yeah, yeah, so we too, like it's,
Well, if there's no other questions, I think maybe we end with that note. Thank you so much again for joining us. It was really, really.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Alexandra.
Great.
Okay, good night to you all. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.